Today we're going to be looking at some potential signings for Liverpool this coming transfer window because quite frankly, Reds fans, there's been very few rumours. So before we get into it, I want to hear who you would sign if you were a Liverpool fan. I took to Twitter, I asked Liverpool fans who they want to see come through the door. In front of me, I've compiled a long list and I've got 4 categories. Priority, good signing, unrealistic, and just confused. We're going to run through the entire 25-man shortlist today that you guys submitted. They are in a variety of different positions in a totally randomised order. Let's start with the Championship Player of the Year, Crescencio Summerville, who's also linked to Chelsea over the last couple of weeks, and a number of different clubs in France too. I have to say, I find this one a little bit confusing. And that's absolutely not because of Crescencio Summerville's quality. 22 years old, 28 goal involvements in the Championship last season. I've spoken on this channel about the ability to step up from England's second tier to the first tier, to have instant impacts in European leagues. But despite some of these numbers, and they are obviously exceptional, a fantastic ball progressor. Look at these carry numbers, look at these take-on numbers. Really electric in and around the box. He does his best work coming off the left. He does his best work coming inside, off the left, onto that right foot, when he can stand the right back up, show him the outside, come back on the inside, curl it into that far corner. It's like the trademark Summerville finish. And I just don't quite get the need for Liverpool to sign another left winger. The only way I could see Crescencio Summerville joining Liverpool this summer is if Luis Diaz was to leave the club. Now, if Luis Diaz was to leave the club, I think Summerville would be a really interesting alternative to him. There are definitely elements of Summerville's game that reminds me of a young Sadio Mane. And it's not just Diaz, is it? I personally feel like Cody Gakpo might have a large impact off that left-hand side this coming season. We saw the impact he could have there playing for the Netherlands. He previously operated there in the Eredivisie and would have been seen and played against Arne Slot's teams. For me, there are arguments that Cody Gakpo might start on the left. So you've got Gakpo, you've got Diaz, you've got Nunez that can play out there, Diogo Jota can play out there. It's a lot of left wing cover. Next up, we find the first of our midfield options, Ederson at Atalanta. And clearly this is a touch point for Liverpool fans, and you would think for Liverpool as an organisation this summer, they will be looking at potentially signing a number 6. I know that they've got the returning Bajcetic, they've also got Endo that can play there, and McAllister, but it still feels like they're a little bit light. By now, we're pretty sure that Arne Slot is probably going to go for a similar sort of system to what he utilised at Feyenoord, with Trent tucking in into that more inverted role, potentially a left-back tucking in as well, shuffling across to make a back 3. I think McAllister might be better suited to playing a little bit higher up the pitch in one of the 8 slots. And if that's the case, a young 6, because of Endo's age and profile, might well be looked at. And look, I think Ederson would be a good option. He's 25 years old now and he is under contract until 2027. There are still the arguments amongst, sort of Atalanta exports. Sort of Gasparini's fool's gold line gets talked about a lot, doesn't it? These players that are absolutely exceptional in Atalanta systems. Is that because of Gasparini's system, or is that because they are excellent players? Well, I actually think if you look at the exports over the last few years, even players going back to Cuti Romero, Dejan Kulusevski, Højlund last year didn't have a bad debut season. Bastoni certainly at Inter Milan. These players, they've been exceptional away from Atalanta. And Ederson certainly could live up to that. I think he would be a good signing. Don't think he would be as expensive as some of the options we're going to come on to later on in this list, like João Neves. And certainly, he's a multifaceted midfielder. Yes, he is a defensive midfielder primarily. Excellent ground cover. Really, really intelligent as well. Massive interception numbers. Some of the biggest interception numbers in Italy. But he's also quite dynamic. Can move the ball, can progress the ball further up the pitch. He's a nice dribbler in tight spaces. The issue you get is that Koopmeiners, also on this list, feels like he's the more likely departure this summer. And I don't see a world in which Atalanta let Ederson and Koopmeiners go. Next up, we've got Kvaradona. Another really confusing option for me. I've already spoken about the depth Liverpool have on that left wing. He's coming off the back of a season where we did see a little bit of a step back, but we saw a bit of a step back from Napoli as a whole. He's still probably the most exciting dribbler in European football, attempted the most dribbles of any player in any league last season amongst the top 5 divisions. Still put up, 17 goal involvements, 11 goals, 6 assists in nearly 3,000 minutes. So still a decent season, but just not the electric breakthrough debut campaign when he first moved from Kazan to Napoli. But again, I'm just going to go back to the left wing depth at Liverpool and the price tag. Kvaradona is going to cost upwards of 80 million, you would think. I don't see a world in which Liverpool spend that on a left winger. Whilst we're on left wingers, let's talk about Chiesa. Another confusing signing for me. Look, I think, unfortunately for Chiesa, a number of different factors have gone against him at Juventus. The injury was major, and it feels like he's not come back with quite the same explosiveness. Definitely doesn't feel like he's come back with the same confidence. Don't think the 2 up front system that Allegri was deploying last year particularly helped him either. And it just feels a little bit like he's forcing things at times. I think you saw the same at Euro 2024. He's almost trying too hard at times, bless him. He does have a contract that's up in 2025, so he makes him much more gettable. Juventus reportedly want 25 million euros for him, which is a low fee for a player who in the past has shown the levels that he's shown. But do I think right now he's playing well enough to start for Liverpool? No. Do I think Liverpool need a left winger? No. Doesn't make sense for me. Next, let's go on to Rodrygo. Let's be honest. Let's be honest, this is an unrealistic move. People will clearly look at the signings that Madrid have made this summer, Kylian Mbappe, Endrick, and potentially think Rodrygo is going to be the number 1 casualty here. Don't necessarily agree. I think the way Carlo Ancelotti plays, he's a vital component. He put up the 3rd most minutes of any player in the Real Madrid squad last season. More minutes than Vinicius Jr. Vinny's injury problems, quite significant. There are more than enough minutes to share across that front line, even if Jude Bellingham drops back into a midfield position for Rodrygo. If we're honest, and it all goes totally tits up next season, and Rodrygo gets no minutes, and the front line evolves to be Vinny, Bellingham, Mbappe, or Vinny, Endrick, Mbappe, and Rodrygo's just suddenly benched, which I'm telling you is not going to happen, then potentially the following summer, he might become an option for Liverpool should Mo Salah leave. But it's looking increasingly likely Mo Salah is going to stay at the club. So if they're going to sign a right winger, it feels like it's going to be a younger backup, frankly, because Salah is going to play minutes. Next up, we've got Alan Varela, the Porto defensive midfielder. And if we had Ederson in there, I think it's fair to put him in good signing as well. What we'll do is we'll put most of the players in good signings, I think, and then later on in the video, we'll bump players, maybe at the end of the video, we'll bump players up to these priority roles and see who we think are the best options. Because there's no doubt Varela at 23 years old, after the season he's just had at Porto, has to be a candidate. There's a reason that he's a contender to be promoted to the Porto captain already after just 1 season at Boca Juniors. Super combative, massive leadership qualities on the pitch. His mentality is excellent. He loves to get involved in a press, but he's also extremely calm, extremely composed on the ball, gets other players involved in wide areas, those long diagonal balls. At Boca, he was able to play in a 4-3-3, playing as a lone pivot with a fullback tucking in alongside him, which suits this new Arne Slot system. And at Porto, he's also operating a double pivot. So he's tactically versatile, technically sound. Off the ball, he's a monster. He's also young enough that I would be saying doesn't come in and demand starts, but like we saw at Porto, once he started, he was not losing that shirt. He quickly became Porto's best midfield option. He might later in the video become a priority for me. Next up, we find our first centre-back. It's an interesting position for Liverpool this coming summer because of how Arne Slot wants to play. It's interesting in a few different ways because at current, I like the roster. I like Van Dijk, I like Konate, I like Quansah. They've also still got Sepp van den Berg on the books, although it looks like he's eventually going to leave if that fee can be lowered. PSV, very interesting. But if Trent is deployed in that midfield role or in that inverted right-back role, Joe Gomez becomes a more viable option in the left-back slot. Had a good season there last year and actually put up more points per game with him in the side than Robertson in the side. So I think there is a bit of a debate to be had there. Tsimikas might well leave the club. And if Joe Gomez is going to play as a left back, is there an option potentially to find a Joe Gomez upgrade, a left-footed, left-sided centre-back / left-back hybrid that can offer cover for Virgil van Dijk. You know, he's not getting any younger, but can also play in the left-back slot when needed. For me, left-footed centre-back feels like one of the more obvious positions to recruit. And that's where we find the first name on the list, William Pacho at Frankfurt, who is really more of an out-and-out centre-back. I don't see him offering cover in the left centre-back, left-back hybrid role in the same way some of the other names we're going to talk about later do. But as an out-and-out defender, he is really, really solid. 3rd in the Bundesliga for ball recoveries, 8th for tackles and interceptions. Operates really nicely and defends really nicely, stepping out into that half space. He can also cover in behind with his pace quite effectively. So again, I think he would be a good option. Coming from Frankfurt, slightly cheaper too, and I think you do have to take that into account because he isn't necessarily going to be a guaranteed starter with Virgil van Dijk there, and Andy Robertson, Joe Gomez also as an option. He's going to have to battle his way into that team, but it could be a good backup pick, this. As for Eberechi Eze, at 26 years old and with a release clause, I mean, if Liverpool were to get him, it would be a good signing, but it would be slightly confusing. I think Szoboszlai potentially going to be playing as a number 10/8. McAllister could also do it, although I prefer him a slight bit deeper, more as an 8. Curtis Jones, you've got Gravenberch, you've got Cody Gakpo in there. I suppose potentially there is room if he decides to play 2 advanced 10s at times. Szoboszlai and Eze would be really, really good fun. I just think at 60 million, it might be slightly unrealistic, despite the fact he's coming off the back of an exceptional season in which he put up top 10% of European midfielders for non-penalty XG and expected assists. A beautiful ball carrier. He'd be a good signing for Liverpool because there's more room in the attacking midfield role than there is on the left wing, where I've put these guys in confusing, but still, I think the price probably proves prohibitive. Ivan Toney was also being suggested. I think this one's probably a bit confusing for me. When I think about how he was using Santiago Jimenez as this sort of high pressing machine off the ball, doesn't totally align with what I think Toney is best at. Really good with his back to play, and I certainly think he would help out a player like Mo Salah by bringing him into play, dropping a bit deeper, taking a centre-back with him, winning flick-ons, being able to isolate the full-back in 1v1 situations. But 60 million price tag still being bandied around. Are Liverpool going to spend that on a player of his age and profile? I think it's very, very unlikely. Let's talk about Koopmeiners, who is out of contract in 2027, but he is still just 26 years old. We spoke about Ederson earlier. There's no doubt that Koopmeiners would be a good signing for Liverpool. I could really imagine him playing in one of the shuttling 8 roles, as we've seen him play under Arne Slot before. You know, these two guys have worked together extensively at AZ Alkmaar to great effect. You could really argue that Koopmeiners' breakout season prior to his move to Atalanta came under Arne Slot. There was a real jump forward in nearly all of his statistics. He's a super well-rounded midfielder. I actually think he does his best work in and around the box, more advanced. Look at that breakthrough campaign under Arne Slot. 11 goals, 2 assists. The season after 15 goals, 5 assists. And last season, you know, these numbers are so impressive from midfield. He's a real threat in front of goal. Puts up massive shot creating action numbers for a midfielder. Very, very impressive player, but Liverpool face stiff competition from other sides in Italy. I can imagine Juventus being very interested and trying to pull this deal off, especially now Thiago Motta is there. Koopmeiners pulling into those wide areas would really suit his system, but they would also probably suit Liverpool. The issue I would have is Koopmeiners pulling into those wide areas. Is it too similar to Dominik Szoboszlai? And at 22, 23 years old, the development you'd hope to see in Szoboszlai's game this season, in terms of his goal scoring and his creative numbers, mirror that of Koopmeiners. He'd be a great option to have in your side though, so I think Hughes, Edwards and Slot will have looked at him. Okay, here we go. A couple of real left centre-back, left-back hybrids coming up in Hincapie and Calafiori. Let's start with Hincapie, and unfortunately for Liverpool, he plays for Bayer Leverkusen. And Xabi Alonso chose to stay at the club, as I've done with every one of my players that are Bayer Leverkusen on every video I've done on this channel. Unless they've got a buyout clause, I think it's unrealistic they leave the club this summer. With Xabi Alonso choosing to stay, part of that agreement him remaining for another year will have been that the squad is not decimated, that players aren't sold, they are kept. And Hincapie was a vital component to how Xabi Alonso utilised his backline, be it when he pulled into the left-back position. At times he can offer cover as a left wing-back when they go to a back three. As a centre-back, he's extremely mobile in wide channels. He'd be an amazing option for Liverpool, but because Xabi Alonso has stayed, it's basically impossible to get players out of Leverkusen. Let's talk about the positives about his game though, because at 22 years old, he might be 5'11", but when you watch him, there is real reminders of sort of Cuti Romero to his game. Extremely front-footed, extremely aggressive, very handsy with his body movements. And given he's also already played at a World Cup, Champions League, Europa League, Copa America, he's got a vast array of experience for a 22-year-old. But because he's still just 22, there are still some improvement points in his game. He's so aggressive, like I said, this sort of Cuti Romero style, without Cuti Romero's sort of nuance. I think he is one of the best defenders in world football, Romero. Clinically underrated, to be honest with you. So good on the ball. I don't think Hincapie has his passing range, doesn't have Romero's line-splitting ability, and also doesn't have his sort of nous, his sort of street smarts yet. That's definitely going to come, but he gives away a lot of fouls, Hincapie. He gives away a lot of silly, bookable offences, and that's probably something that could be coached out of him. So I think potentially another season at Leverkusen, more of those long diagonal balls, more front foot defending, another season to develop under an amazing coach in Xabi Alonso, and then potentially gets his big move. But this summer, I think unless they've got a release clause or they've got some deep ties to Bayern Munich like Jonathan Tah, I think it's going to be unrealistic they leave Leverkusen this summer. Next up, we've got Calafiori, who I'm a bit confused as to why Liverpool aren't going heavier for. Because in terms of his profile, his left-footedness, his age, his ability to play as a left-back and as a left-sided centre-back, you know, the majority, I think nearly 90% of his minutes came as a left-sided centre-back last season in that Thiago Motta Bologna side, but he can also operate at left-back. His ability on the ball, as we saw in glimpses at Euro 2024, and we saw extensively in the Serie A campaign last season when he steps into midfield, drives past players. It's amazing to watch. But he's also got some of that classic Italian defender in him. Loves to throw himself in front of the ball. Loves to read the game. Look at these interception numbers from a centre-back. Nearly 2 interceptions per 90. Great numbers in terms of his on-the-ball ability. Able to contribute in forward areas. I mean, nearly 1.8 shot-creating actions per 90 from centre-back. And with a fee reportedly at 50 million euros, Arsenal are closing in on him, although with a 50% sell-on fee to Basel, that might well end up climbing, because otherwise Bologna are just seeing 25 million euros for a superstar in the making. Like, I'll put him in good signing. He would almost be my first priority. I'm really surprised Liverpool aren't going in harder for him. Next, we've got Murillo. Probably unrealistic now that Nottingham Forest have resolved those PSR issues. You can see them charging a huge figure for what is really their best player. Defensively, certainly, you know, you could argue Morgan Gibbs-White or one of the forwards. I think Murillo, after that breakthrough campaign, you know, did he win Nottingham Forest Player of the Season? If he didn't, it's a disgrace. He should have won it. He was their best player last campaign. His front-footed defending combined with his amazing ability to carry the ball past players. You know, some of his slaloming runs we saw in the Premier League last season were a joy to watch. Make him a really attractive option. A sort of Calafiori, Hincapie style player, but I just think with Forest PSR issues resolved, him on a extremely long contract, and the way we're seeing Premier League clubs in the centre-back position, the left-sided centre-back position, jack up fees for players like Jared Branthwaite, who is going for upwards of £70 million, Forest might end up asking for similar numbers for Murillo, and that to me is unrealistic. Whilst we're on the topic of unrealistic, let's put João Neves in there. I know Liverpool fans are really interested in him because he fits into that defensive midfield, the number 6 position that's young and can support but also be a starter. He certainly has the mentality, the leadership, the pressing to fit into an Arne Slot system. But €120 million release clause, guys. And we can talk about Benfica potentially accepting less than that €120 million release clause. Varela, €70 million release clause. Ederson, not sure what his release clause is, if he's even got one in Italy, but 120 million euros is not happening. Another unrealistic option, Anthony Gordon. Obviously, when this rumour really started to get some traction was when Newcastle had their PSR issues and potentially had to sell a star player to make the cut-off point. Now that they have no PSR issues, there's no way Anthony Gordon leaves. He's one of their 2 star assets alongside Alexander Isak, an amazing contributor last season on and off the ball. Now they don't have to sell him, they definitely won't. Let's talk Dani Olmo, who I actually think would be a good option if we put Eze in there. It's only fair to put Dani Olmo in there when we're talking about the addition of a number 10 alongside Dominic Szoboszlai. It's not urgent, it's not essential, but is there a sort of market opportunity because of that cheaper 60 million euro release clause that, if it hasn't already run out, is running out very shortly? And if it hasn't already run out, there are big upsides to Dani Olmo's game. Really intricate creator around the pitch. Actually does better off the ball than many give him credit for because of his time in the Red Bull group. He is more of a presser than a lot of his Spanish counterparts. But I think as things stand right now, I wouldn't have him any higher. I don't think I'll be bumping him into priority. Some of these other players are certainly going to go up there later in the video. Okay, let's talk about Leny Yoro. Now, he shouldn't really be included in this list because he has currently just passed his medical at the time of recording at Manchester United. But I'm actually going to put this into what should have been, and that is a priority signing. It feels like he was an obvious long-term replacement to Van Dijk. Someone that could play alongside Van Dijk when Konate suffered his usual injury issues. I think given that Liverpool dropped out of the running for Yoro because Real Madrid were going to sign him and he's ended up at Manchester United, they've paid a lot and the wages are probably bigger than Liverpool would have offered, but feels slightly negligent. Jeremy Frimpong. Certainly going to go in good signing. Unlike Hincapie, who I put in Unrealistic, talked about Leverkusen not selling players, he has a release clause, 40 million euros, that I believe is just active for 1 more week. So somebody's going to have to make a move on Frimpong soon, because surely he's not going to just remain at Leverkusen. And I actually think he would be an alright option for Liverpool. I don't necessarily think, though, that would be as a right back. For me, if Frimpong comes back to the Premier League, there is a genuine argument to be made that he has a future as a right winger rather than a right back. His best work at Leverkusen last season came in extremely advanced areas. You know, these are not the numbers of a fullback. To be putting up 0.6 non-penalty XG and expected assists per 90 is frightening. It's because he played so high up the pitch. You know, 9 goals, 7 assists last season, 8 goals, 7 assists the season before. He's basically a winger at times. And if that's the case, could he provide cover to Mo Salah? Could he be a backup to Mo Salah that offers something very different? Salah wants to come in on that left foot, doesn't he? He wants to play in the half space. Frimpong wants to play wider than him. He wants to play on the touchline. He wants to get to the byline. He would offer something different at right back should Trent end up playing as an inverter or end up playing as a classic midfielder. Connor Bradley is also there as well, so you've got that thought in your mind. But he would offer cover all the way at the right touchline. He's available for an extremely cheap fee at 40 million euros. He speaks great English. He's tempting me as the best option, genuinely, as a backup right winger. Nico Williams, again, I've got these left wing guys in confusing, and it's just along the same lines. Amazing talent. He was maybe my favourite player to watch at Euro 2024, even more so than Lamine Yamal. Lamine Yamal got all of the hype, but Nico Williams, his decision making is just so high level. Probably going to end up at Barcelona. Fine. But I just think, again, for Liverpool, unless Luis Diaz leaves, if Luis Diaz leaves, all of this changes. But if he doesn't, this would confuse me. Geertruida is up next. I can see the links. The links are obvious because of Arne and his work he's done with Geertruida. But really, he is just going to want to play where Trent plays. And that is as a right back that inverts. I don't think he offers the same things that Jeremy Frimpong, for instance, offers as a right winger. Don't think you need him in the right centre-back cover, which we saw at times for Feyenoord, because you've got Konate there. You've also got Jarell Quansah there. Joe Gomez can play there as well. Do you need him inverting when you've got Trent that is going to occupy that role? Connor Bradley is also an option in the right back position. I don't know. I'm maybe a bit confused. I think it would be fine, but unless it's just a backup, I don't really get it. Let's dip back into the centre-back market then. Another left-footed centre-back option, Inacio at Sporting, who has a €60 million release clause, which must make him a good option because he is an extremely high-level defender. I think one thing to note with Inacio, though, is has played pretty much all of his football in a back three, a left-sided centre-back in a back three. Obviously, that's how Amorim plays. That is the Ruben Amorim principle. So, does he play in the same way at Liverpool? And that means that on paper, yes, he's a left-sided centre-back, but hasn't really operated in a back four as a left-sided centre-back a whole lot. Don't think he's really operated as a left-back either. Doesn't really suit his game. He's lovely on the ball. It's actually probably the best feature of his game, I believe. You look at his on-the-ball numbers. Really, really tidy. Especially when you look at nearly 9 progressive passes per 90. That would be a big asset to Liverpool. And it's not a player I think you can discount for that role just because he's historically played in the three. As for Mo Kudus, who's just 23 years old still, the most frightening dribbler potentially in the entirety of the Premier League last season, just goes past players like they aren't there. I think he put up the third most dribbles of any player in Europe last season. There was a game against Chelsea where he completed 13 dribbles in one match for West Ham. And I think these rumours really were bubbling when his release clause was active. £85 million release clause built into that West Ham contract, but that is no longer active. It becomes active again next summer. I think it's just for the month June. And whilst that's the case and there is no buyout clause, it's unrealistic you're going to get him out of West Ham. Next season, if he has another campaign like we saw from West Ham this year, if he can continue his progressive carry numbers, put up more goal involvements and impress in that Julian Lopetegui side, genuinely £85 million becomes a viable option to replace Mo Salah. Seriously. Next up, you've got Lunin. Now, it feels like Kelleher might well leave the club. He's talked about wanting to become a number one in the past. If that does happen, Adrian's obviously left the club. Alisson suffered quite extensive injury problems last season that actually meant that Kelleher put up a similar number of minutes to him. If that's the case, then maybe Lunin becomes a good signing, but I just don't see him wanting to leave Madrid. Being Madrid's backup goalkeeper is actually one of the better backups in world football. Not only are you living in an amazing city in beautiful weather all the time, playing amongst the best players in the world, but Courtois' injury record makes it slightly more likely you're going to put up significant minutes. So you would just be swapping Madrid's number 2 for Liverpool's number 2. Don't quite get that. I think if Lunin goes, he has to be the standout number 1. I actually think that's unrealistic. I'm dropping it back down. Let's talk about Mark Guéhi, who would be a good signing for Liverpool. He is fabulous, Mark Guéhi. He was England's best player at Euro 2024. He is brilliant every time I watch him for Crystal Palace. I've actually spoken to him a few times in interviews, and he is one of the most mature footballers I've ever sat down with at just 23 years old. You can see why he has been a captain of nearly every Chelsea youth level, a leader in that England group, a leader at Crystal Palace. He is so well spoken, so articulate, so mature, and that really shows in how he plays. He makes very few mistakes when he's on the pitch, Mark Guéhi. He keeps everything very simple, very athletic. He will be a Champions League level centre-back in the next couple of seasons. But whilst they've lost Elise, whilst Eze has a release clause, it feels like Guéhi's price is going to be monstrous, right? And if he was to leave Crystal Palace, surely he has to be a nailed-on centre-back. He has to be the guy at the next club. And is that going to be the case? Is he just going to walk in and sort of kick Konate to the sideline? Don't know. Certainly not going to do that with Van Dijk. And he has operated as a left-sided centre-back for the majority of his time at Crystal Palace and for England, despite the fact he is right-footed. Final one is a player we should not discount for that Liverpool defensive midfield role, is Martin Zubimendi, whose clause is still active, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. And as we saw again for Spain in the final, when sort of English commentators and English pundits were laughing about Zubimendi coming on, replacing Rodri who went off injured, he is an unbelievably high caliber operator. We can talk to a blue in the face about his ability on the ball, his progressive pass numbers, pass completion numbers, his pass volume, the areas he's able to pick up the ball in tight spaces and turn out of presses, really impressive. But what we don't talk about enough with Zubimendi is actually his ability off the ball, the amount of duels he wins in La Liga, very, very high, both aerial and ground. He is becoming a serious option for my priority for Liverpool. I think he'd be an awesome signing. A little bit like McAllister. I can imagine him and McAllister playing in midfield. My only issue would be, is there enough mobility there? Zubimendi, not the fastest, not the most powerful. And do the numbers immediately translate to the Premier League? McAllister, not the fastest, not the most powerful, but really combative. A dog, in the best sense of the word. So now it's time to bump players up to priority. Who do we think? Let me know who you would immediately bump up for the left-sided centre-back role. For me, I'll be honest with you, I think it's Calafiori. I like the fact he can operate in the left-back role as well. And like I spoke about earlier, the upgraded Joe Gomez, Calafiori feels like a really nice fit for that role. He could also invert when Trent's not fit, to play as a left-back inverted, to sit alongside your number 6. I really like Calafiori, and I'm surprised Liverpool aren't more involved. Then you've got the defensive midfield position, and for me, I'm leaning towards Varela at Porto. 70 million euro release clause, yes, it's high. We've only seen one season of him in Portugal, but because of his combative nature, because of his ability to cover the ground, his composure and his leadership, I think he suits the Liverpool style really well. It's between him and Ederson, and I just think, given his younger age and the fact he's played in a single pivot, a double pivot at Boca and at Porto, how we've seen players translate from the Portuguese league to the Premier League recently, he's probably my number one choice in that list. It's not the perfect signing, but I don't know who that player is that's out there. Does that mean we've also got a wild card in there? I think it does. I'm moving Jeremy Frimpong up there. I'm saying that he would be exceptional right-wing cover for Salah. I know that Harvey Elliott can play out there, fine. But he would just offer something so different to what Liverpool have got now. His ability to get on the outside, his release clause, his age. Is there anyone else I would look at in there? Potentially Koopmeiners or Eze. Somebody who can offer more goals from the midfield. Let me know what you think, Liverpool fans. Who would you jump up into priority?